Let's take you back now to one of the stories that we've been tracking for you, which is the renewed inquest looking into the death of Imam Abdullah Haron. That got underway earlier today. Natalie Malgas is our reporter on the ground tracking that story. Natalie, you know, this is a family like so many others that have been waiting for this moment to have a process that they believe they can trust in to fully get to the bottom of how, in particular, Mr. Haron died.
To essentially have a fresh set of eyes go through the evidence dating back to 1969, Kathy, to determine the truth as to what happened. For a very long time, the family was adamant that they were suspicious around the circumstances that their father died in. He had been in detention for 123 days. They were told by the police at the time that Imam Abdullah Haron had fallen, sustained injuries as a result of that fall, and died subsequently to the fall. The family didn't quite believe that to be all the facts. So they're really grateful and hopeful that the truth will come out. They are quite heartened by what they've learnt in the last week already, hearing from the aeronautical engineer and to independent medical experts who gave testimony that the injuries that the Imam sustained could not have been as a result of a fall, but in fact of sustained torture. Today we had two witnesses testifying in what I must say was a much anticipated sitting of the hearings today. The first we heard from Jeremy Cronin, a former political prisoner. Of course, we know him as a politician and member of the Communist Party in South Africa. But he was speaking in his capacity as a political activist and being a former political detainee. He had recounted interactions with and interrogations with members of the apartheid security branch, speaking of these legendary figures, these notorious figures, bombastic and threatening personas, sketching for us the characters of recurring names that come up in the inquest into the death of Imam Haron. In fact, one particular name was that of Spyker van Wyk, who is being hailed as almost the lead investigator. He was particularly threatening and bombastic. In fact, we heard from Jeremy Cronin that often during his interrogations he was threatened with, "You remember what happened to the Imam, so unless you want to suffer the same fate, don't leave out any details, don't try and ignore our instructions," pointing to the fact that this particular officer was one of the prominent figures who had tortured and manhandled the Imam during his stay in detention. He had moved around from the Cape Town Central Police Station to the Maitland Police Station, where he ultimately died in 1969. We also heard from the last surviving apartheid-era police officer, in fact, on record, the last person to have seen the Imam alive, Johannes Burger, who says he was a junior officer at the time of meeting the Imam. He only actually knew him for about 14 days, but those are 14 crucial days, 2 key weeks in trying to decipher what exactly happened to the Imam. We heard from Burger during his testimony that they had a cordial relationship. They spoke of pleasantries. They inquired about each other's families and spoke about sport, particularly rugby. Burger even broke down on the stand earlier today when he recounted what a significant loss this was, not only for the Haron family, but for the broader Cape Town community, because of the kind of interaction and legend that surrounded this particular detainee. But one of the strongest points to come out of his testimony today was the fact that he was insistent. He simply had no idea how the Imam had sustained these extensive injuries. On the last day that he saw the Imam alive, he opened his cell and allowed the Imam out into the courtyard as per procedure, as he had done several times before in his interaction with the Imam. And it was on the last day that he kept rubbing part of his torso, saying he's suffering from intense pain, but only asked for a handful of tablets, which Burger then offered to the Imam. But it was only much later, Burger says, when he saw the diagrams in the post-mortem of all the injuries the Imam had sustained, that he realized that the Imam was actually tortured. This wasn't just idle pains or something small that he had perhaps initially brushed off. But it was this exact point that counsel for the Haron family kept pressing on. In fact, went as far as to accuse Burger of perjury, lying under oath, that this ambitious young officer who went on to have quite an illustrious career, retiring in 1997 as a captain, that he, in his career, in his years of service, was never privy, was never suspicious, or had any kind of intel or insight into what his colleagues in the security branch was the operations that they were conducting. The counsel for the Haron family and members of the Haron family themselves say this is simply far-fetched, that this was someone who had regular dealings with the Imam, knew that he had irregular movements, would be gone for days at a time, moved around to different police stations, and was in significant pain, but wasn't able to say that this political detainee was suffering, enduring intense torture at the hands of his police colleagues.
Natalie, we're going to leave it there. So quite a lot then coming out of day one of that inquiry.